Welcome to this module on climate and soil for commercial tea cultivation. In this module, we will try to learn three objectives. First, we will try to discuss the requirements for soil and climatic conditions for tea cultivation. Secondly, we will discuss how to select a suitable site for tea cultivation. And thirdly, we will try to explain the practices needed to conserve the soil and water when we try to do commercial tea cultivation. So far the soil requirements are concerned, we have first physical property of the soil. It requires that your soil should be of adequate depth. It should not be very shallow, that is at least 1.5 meter. Soil texture, it should be moderate, not very sandy, not very clay. Soil structure, it should be having adequate amount of organic matter up to 50%, and water holding capacity of the physical soil should be good. Secondly, we need to see the soil requirements in terms of chemical property. It includes that you should have a good and adequate amount of soil pH, that is the kind of soil, whether it is ideal for tea. It should not be very acidic, and also it should not be very alkali. So pH value for soil which is good for tea cultivation is about 4.5 to 5.5, and in terms of nutrient, it should have the adequate amount of nutrient. And if we try to see the ranges for different nutrients, you can see in the screen that what are the different ranges which are good for tea cultivation. Then lastly, that we need to have the biological property for soil which is good for tea cultivation. It has different sections like various organisms. It also has different kinds of microflora and microfauna, different types of those organisms that should be there. And you can see all these things in the screen. And the bottom line, that it should be rich in content so far the biological property of soil is concerned. So if you look at the requirements in terms of soil, then you will find that for tea cultivation, the soil should be moderate. It should not be very shallow. It should have adequate amount of nutrients and organic matter, and it should have a relatively good capacity to hold water. It should have a moderate pH, and it should also be very rich in terms of microflora and microfauna. So if you have these kinds of soil, that will be good for commercial tea cultivation. Now, when we try to see the land for tea cultivation, you need to see that what kind of land is good for commercial tea cultivation. That a well-drained highland is actually suitable for tea cultivation. There should not be any waterlogging, heavy soil erosion, drought and landslides, because all these create problems in tea cultivation. Now, three things are important. First, tea can be cultivated in areas where the slope is up to 50%. However, in areas where the slope is more than 2%, contour planting and contour drainage should be followed. Tea can be successfully cultivated in altitude up to 2,500 meters above the mean sea level. At higher elevations, the air temperature falls, so therefore it actually inhibits the tea growth. So therefore you need to understand the altitude of your land. And in hilly areas, for instance, if you try to do tea cultivation, then it requires some special care. Climatic requirements for tea cultivation. The climatic conditions include rainfall, temperature, relative humidity, day length, light intensity, wind, occurrence of hail, etc. And we know that all these conditions influence both productivity and quality of tree. So far the good climatic conditions are concerned for tea cultivation, we should see that whether it is well distributed rainfall is there, a minimum 1200 per annum, not too hot and not too cold. An ideal temperature for tea cultivation is actually 13 to 30 degrees centigrade. And when you have more than that, you should have adequate shade trees. Day length is very important. And if the day length is not adequate, then it actually hampers the growth of tea. Relative humidity should be there. 80 to 90% is a good for commercial tea cultivation. Wind, it should be reasonable because it needs to cool down the climate and cool down the temperature for good growth of tea bushes, and therefore it is always good if you have a good windy climate. And during winter tea bushes normally dormant, so ideally if you have a very longer winter, then that climate is not very conducive for tea cultivation. So therefore these are the climatic conditions which are essential for commercial tea cultivation. Now when you try to select a site for tea cultivation, then you need to keep in mind certain things. First of all, the suitability of an area for tea cultivation can be judged from the existing vegetation. This existing vegetation provides some indication regarding the quality of soil and quality of climate. So therefore, this is really important for looking at the existing vegetation before you go for commercial tea cultivation in non-traditional areas. Normally, there are certain species of trees which are good for soil conditions, which is suitable for tea cultivation, like albigeas. The area is suitable where albigea species form a part of the natural vegetation. You can look at the picture, which gives a pink kind of flower for those plants. And if you have those vegetation in your area, then you may be sure that probably this area is good for tea cultivation. And at the same time, if you have a forest area with deep-rooted trees, it indicates that the depth is good, so that can be suitable for tea cultivation. And normally, the aluminum accumulator plants, if the soil is good for those kind of plants, then that also good for tea cultivation, because tea is basically aluminum accumulator plant. So by looking at the natural vegetation which is there in the locality, you can actually select a site for tea cultivation. Lastly, it is very important to see that your soil and water is conserved for tea cultivation properly. First of all, normally the washing away of the topsoil along with the organic matter is very common in tea plantation, because when we try to nurture the tea plants, this usually happens. So that should be prevented, and that can be prevented by various methods. For instance, you can have lot of various cover crops. You can have mulching, which actually protects the roots of the tea bushes, growing citronella and weeping love grass kind of things. And you can also adopt contour planting, planting of shade trees, avoid soil streaming, hoeing, forking, etc. And these are the methods by which we can protect the soil erosion and we can conserve the soil which is required for tea cultivation. Similarly, you cannot have a good tea plantation if you have a waterlogged area. For instance, if you have waterlogged condition, then tea plant cannot thrive. So therefore, ideally, you should have a proper drainage mechanism in area, which is important for tea cultivation. And if you have different methods which are there to adopt for draining the excess water, from the root zone of the tea bushes, then you can have a good tea plantation and tea growth for your cultivation. So therefore, adopting proper methods for conservation of soil and water are essential for commercial tea cultivation. So therefore, we have learned three things today: that what kind of soil and climatic conditions are required for tea cultivation. Secondly, how do you select a site for tea cultivation? And lastly, then how do you conserve the soil and water which is good for tea cultivation? So with this, we come to an end of this module. Thank you very much.